This reading is for educational purposes only. Today's book is Cost Reduction and Optimization for Manufacturing and Industrial Companies, written by Joseph Berk. This was written in 2010. Table of contents. Introduction. Every business can reduce its costs. The need for doing so is even more urgent in times of recession, but cost reduction is always important. It shouldn't take failing banks, tightened credit, and federal bailouts to make people realize that keeping costs down is important. However, in many cases, when times are good, managers get sloppy. Sometimes the money is rolling in so fast that cost reduction seems to be irrelevant. The danger is that times don't stay good if an organization doesn't make cost reduction a priority. In good times and bad, it will be left in the dust when times do turn bad. Every manufacturer and every industrial company wants to reduce costs, but knowing how to do so without adversely affecting quality or client satisfaction can be difficult. Cost reduction is not taught in business schools, engineering programs, or any other academic environment. Cost reduction is not an innate skill for most of us, but it can be learned. It's not that difficult. I started focusing on how to reduce costs in a large manufacturing organization many years ago. I worked for a visionary leader who had accepted a $250 million production contract at a projected loss. He wanted to turn that projected loss into a profit. That was my job. I was charged with reducing costs enough to turn a contract with a projected loss into one with a healthy profit. I worked with brilliant and creative engineers, manufacturing managers, and purchasing specialists. We were successful in dropping costs in every area. After doing so, I analyzed and categorized what we did, and I realized two things. This isn't rocket science. For the most part, cost reduction actions are common sense endeavors. The previous statement notwithstanding, there is a technology here, a cost reduction technology. I grew that experience into a successful consulting practice helping other companies lower their costs and become more profitable. Cost reduction and optimization for manufacturing and industrial companies is based on practices developed in that first cost reduction assignment and on refinements developed in the next 20 years of consulting engagements with hundreds of organizations. I tell you these facts so that you know my background. It's probably not too different from yours, and I will tell you up front that I'm not any smarter than you are. What I bring to the table is that I have focused on this area for nearly a quarter of a century. That experience is here for you to use. Cost reduction and optimization for manufacturing and industrial companies is intended to be an easy book to read. I wrote it for supervisors, managers, and executives. It includes easy to understand and easy to implement cost reduction concepts. The book has 6 general areas: labor, material, design, process, overhead, and measuring progress. The chapters are simple but direct. Each chapter dives into a cost reduction area and starts with the bottom line first by summarizing key points. Asks a few questions to help you determine if the area presents an opportunity for your organization. Provides a roadmap for implementing recommended actions. Presents information that completely and succinctly explains the relevant concepts. Identifies who in the organization should do the work. Outlines risks and suggested risk mitigation actions. That last point is critical because cost reduction involves change, and wherever change is present, so are risks. You have to know what the risks are in order to manage them. You can read this book from front to back in a day, or each chapter can be used in a standalone manner. The chapters are short. Each chapter provides proven tactics for cutting costs in a specific area. Some topics are covered in a few pages, and others take longer, but the objective in each chapter is to get to the point without a lot of extraneous data. Where mathematics and other more complex tracking methodologies are needed, there are instructions on how to use Excel to make it easy. There are lots of tables, graphs, and photos to show the concepts graphically because that makes them easier to understand. As an added bonus, we're making an Excel file available to cost reduction and optimization for manufacturing and industrial companies' readers for free. File is available at www.manufacturingtraining.com. You don't have to download the free Excel file to use this book. The concepts and approach are explained fully in these pages, but it can save you a bit of time in areas where spreadsheets can accelerate the analysis, implementation, and management of each concept. 1. Organizing a cost reduction program. The bottom line. You need a multidisciplinary team to attain significant cost reduction. Support from the top helps greatly. You will encounter resistance to the cost reduction effort, and there are risks associated with cost reduction activities, but these issues can be overcome. The team needs to prioritize cost reduction opportunities, assess the necessity of all costs, quantify projected savings, identify implementation costs and risks for each proposed action, meet at least once a week, and maintain an action plan to create and sustain cost reduction momentum. Key questions. Do we have a cost reduction effort in place? Do we have cost reduction targets? How do we identify and eliminate unnecessary costs? What obstacles will we encounter and how will we get around them? Teamwork. If you want to reduce costs in your company, you can't do it by yourself. There are cost reduction opportunities in every department. Identifying and implementing these cost reductions requires the enthusiastic cooperation of people in sales, finance, engineering, manufacturing, quality assurance, purchasing, facilities, and human resources. Even if you wish to limit cost reductions to a single area, you'll still need help from people in that area and probably the finance organization. You can't mandate cost reduction. You have to have help from the people who will make it happen. Senior management support will help to make the cost reduction effort successful. If your interest in cost reduction is a result of a directive from the organization's chief executive, you already have the senior level support you need. If your organization is self-initiated, support from the person at the top is a great asset. You need support from other cost reduction team members, but if the chief executive is on board, others will be more enthusiastic about supporting the effort. The best way to identify and implement cost reduction is to build a team with 1 or 2 people from each area who believe in the mission. This team should be made up of people who are already in the company. You don't need to hire more people for this. In fact, a recurring theme throughout this book will be to keep headcount as low as possible. Resistance to change. Most people are naturally resistant to change, and cost reduction will involve change, sometimes big change. Department managers and others may resist cost reduction related changes for any of several reasons. The idea was not theirs. The idea will involve effort on their part. They did not think of the idea first, and perhaps that's a source of embarrassment. The idea has implementation and other operational risks. There may be turf issues where the team is recommending, eliminating, or modifying a pet project, or the affected managers don't like the idea of someone else suggesting how their department should operate. All of these resistance to change factors are likely to be encountered as the cost reduction effort proceeds. All of these arguments must be overcome if the cost reduction effort is to succeed. It's a lot easier for people to accept change if the general manager or company president is visibly and consistently behind it. That's not the only requirement for overcoming resistance to change, but without top-level support, it will be harder to overcome. The cost reduction team. If the chief executive asks you to head up a cost reduction effort, you are in a good position. The most important thing you should ask for is that you get good people on the cost reduction team. You don't necessarily want the head of each functional area, and you certainly don't want people who are less valuable employees within their departments. You want people who are bright, curious, and out-of-the-box thinkers, have a high energy level, make things happen, and meet their schedule commitments. If you can assemble a team with people meeting these criteria, you're going to have a lot of fun and your company will realize great cost savings. In the first meeting, the first assignment should be identifying and ranking the organization's current costs and assessing the necessity of each cost. You won't be able to do all of this in the first meeting, but the team members should be able to have gathered this information by the next meeting. This will require support from the finance department, as will many cost reduction activities, which is why it makes sense to have a finance person on the team. The cost reduction team should meet weekly at a minimum, because if you meet less frequently, the effort will lose momentum. Here's a suggested approach for how the cost reduction meetings should be run. You or someone else who writes well and is good at capturing details should take notes and publish meeting minutes no later than 1 day after each meeting. The meeting minutes should be sent to the chief executive, the team members, and the heads of each department. Doing this keeps others in the loop and it keeps the effort alive. The meeting minutes should include a living task list. We'll present a meeting suggested format and say more about this in a bit. Team members should provide input regarding the status of each task in the meeting, and each person preparing the meeting minutes should update the task list to show current status. The team members should discuss cost reduction ideas in a free-flowing manner. The ideas may come from team members or from others in the company. All of these ideas should be captured on paper. After discussing all of the ideas, the team should decide if each area should be pursued. If the team thinks an idea has merit, in most cases it will go to the affected department manager. We'll talk about this more later. Cost Pareto analysis. Identifying and ranking all of the organization's current cost is best presented on a department-by-department basis and by overhead cost categories for the entire company. We recommend presenting this in a Pareto format. It's important to do this for each department and by overhead cost category to identify where the greatest opportunities exist. Within the manufacturing area, for example, labor and material costs are probably higher than other costs. And based on that, they probably have greater cost reduction opportunities. Smaller cost categories will also offer opportunities, and there may be low-hanging fruit that the team wants to grab. But in general, the larger cost categories offer greater opportunities when seeking cost reductions. Let's assume the manufacturing department reviews its monthly operating costs when they receive from the finance department, and they find the following. With this information in an Excel spreadsheet, it's a simple matter to sort the data. It's already been sorted in table 1-1, and prepare the Pareto chart in figure 1-2. Footnote. Vilfredo Pareto was an Italian economist who is credited with originating the 80-20 rule when he observed that 80% of Italy's wealth was concentrated in 20% of the population. This led to the creation of the 80-20 concept and Pareto charts, which show most frequently occurring to least frequently occurring items, or most costly to least costly expenses. The idea is that efforts should be focused on the most significant areas. Those are my cats. I love it when I read. Based on the information presented in figure 1.2, it is obvious that material and labor are the largest cost categories. Logic dictates that seeking cost reduction opportunities in these areas offers the best potential. In addition to steel and labor costs, over time, a frequently abused area pops out as a relatively large cost, so it should also become a cost reduction target. Once the analysis has been completed for each department and for the company's overhead costs, the team can then brainstorm cost reduction activities in these areas. Cupid. The team can also apply the techniques to be reviewed in detail throughout the book. As mentioned earlier, the team's activities should not be limited to just the largest cost categories. We're only suggesting that because of their size, these big hitters probably contain greater cost reduction opportunities. There will be opportunities in the lower cost areas that come from other people's suggestions as well as the cost reduction team members. The team should consider these as well. Assessing necessity. The next action is identifying the magnitude and evaluating the necessity of each cost item. This is best done on a department-by-department basis and for each overhead cost. Table 1.2 shows the manufacturing area. The idea here is to identify each cost as necessary, unnecessary, or nice to have. The team may wish to use different necessity descriptors, but the concept is to identify unnecessary costs and nice to have items as potential candidates for elimination. Necessary items should not be eliminated, but they may be candidates for further analysis using the techniques described in the rest of this book. The first part of this task is relatively easy, identifying the cost items. The second part, evaluating the necessity of each, is much more subjective. Resistance to cost reductions in some of these areas will almost certainly emerge. Sometimes when costs are presented this way, the frivolity of the necessary cost becomes obvious and no resistance occurs. Table 1.2 shows a recommended approach for accomplishing this. Cost reduction action plans. Maintaining and updating an action item list is critical. It assures that each cost reduction concept is captured on paper and retained until it has been objectively evaluated and either discarded or implemented. It's also important because it identifies who needs to do what, by when they need to do it, and current status. Here's a example of the Table 1.3 recommended cost reduction team task action plan format. Feel free to pause here if you need to. The action item list becomes the cost reduction plan, and maintaining and circulating it lets everyone know how the team is doing. Table 1.3 shows a format that works well. As the table indicates, completed actions are shaded in gray, and actions that are behind schedule are shaded in red. This gives the team and everyone who reviews the plan a quick look at how things are progressing. Nearly every assigned action will require the efforts of more than one person, but it's always a good idea to list only the name for each action in the plan. The chances of the action being completed on schedule are higher if it has a single owner. Table 1.3 shows the plan for only one area of the organization, and the example shown here is not intended to be complete. The action plan needs to address all areas. Quantifying estimated savings and implementation costs. The actions the team identifies in its plan are all intended to produce a cost savings, but before making any changes, the team should objectively estimate what the savings will be. Great care in maintaining objectivity is required here. It is very easy to overestimate planned savings. Most cost reduction concepts require implementation actions, and there is usually a cost associated with these actions. Sometimes there are no costs, for example, if an unnecessary step is eliminated, but most of the time there are costs associated with changes. For example, engineers may need to redesign products. Manufacturing engineers may need to redesign processes. The purchasing department may need to obtain prices from alternative suppliers. New production equipment may be required. Facilities engineers may need to modify the building. New designs may require testing to confirm requirements compliance. There may be disruptions in the change as the change is implemented. These actions all involve cost, and it is important to accurately predict what these costs will be. The obvious reason for doing this is that it makes no sense to implement a cost reduction change if the implementation cost exceeds the savings. Our experience indicates that it is best to quantify the savings on an annualized basis and to consider the implementation costs in the first year. Sometimes in job shop production environments with production runs lasting less than a year, it is best to quantify savings on a contract basis. This is another area where the finance department can help. Who should do this work? The cost reduction team cannot do everything. In fact, by itself, the team won't be able to evaluate or implement most of the ideas. The team is a catalyst. It has to work with others in the organization to gain support, evaluate ideas, and where appropriate, implement cost reduction actions. Risks. Risk has to be a key part of the decision process when evaluating every cost reduction concept. In assessing risks, there are 3 questions to consider. Have we done this before? What can go wrong if we do this? What are the things we need to do to prevent bad things from happening? If the concept being considered has been implemented elsewhere, or if it consists of smaller actions that have been done before, the risk is probably minimal. If neither condition exists, the organization needs to aggressively and objectively identify all potential consequences, not just the planned savings, and take steps to manage the risks. Risks may include customer reaction, product performance, supplier reliability, morale, process yield, safety, and other factors. Specific risks in different areas are identified in each chapter throughout the rest of this book. The important thing to recognize is that cost reduction involves change, change carries associated risk, and prudent people identify and manage risk. Part 1. Labor. Labor optimization is a key part of any cost reduction effort. It's not the only part, but it is an important part, so we will address it as the first of our 6 major areas. This section focuses on defining an appropriate headcount and controlling staff growth, developing and implementing time standards, measuring and using efficiency to improve performance, assessing machine utilization and improving it, controlling overtime, making multiple shifts productive, finding and reducing lost time, using a learning curve to drive costs down. 2. Defining headcount and controlling staff growth. The bottom line. Headcount should be based on the organization's required output, the work content, and the time required for the work, and reasonable efficiency estimates. The organization can use this objective, quantitative method for determining headcount in both direct labor and overhead areas. Headcount tends to grow if not aggressively managed. The organization should add staff only if the need can be justified after considering all other alternatives. Key questions. How many people do we need? How many people do we have? How do we determine how many people we need? Who approves staff additions? Are there alternatives to hiring more people? The headcount determination roadmap. When cost reduction is mentioned, many people assume that headcount is the first and perhaps only target. Headcount is an important cost element, but it is not the only area to consider when reducing costs. Headcount needs to be addressed, though, because labor is usually a huge part of the cost base. It's easy to add headcount, and headcount tends to increase in an organization not focused on matching headcount to work content. The result is increased cost. The issue is defining how many people the organization actually needs to operate. Sometimes this question emerges when starting a new facility or product line, and sometimes it emerges when someone wants to add people to an existing area. It should be a question that management considers all the time, even in stable production environments. Based on our observations, this is what usually occurs when organizations define how many people they need. In new organizations, management creates a structure using people from elsewhere in the organization, by hiring people or by doing both. The headcount determination is often driven by a subjective assessment of what the organization will have to do. Translating the work into headcount is typically based on qualitative reasoning. In existing organizations, departments and work centers already exist. Over time, situations and requirements change. New work is accepted, responsibilities grow, new equipment is acquired, people become available from other parts of the organization, etc. This occurs constantly, but it especially occurs when sales increase. The logic is we are probably about right now, so if we have more work to do, we must need more people. In consulting for hundreds of companies, these approaches are ones we most frequently encounter. These approaches are dangerous. they add expense. They do not base headcount on work content. Managers who use these approaches are not focused on accomplishing the organization's objectives at the lowest possible cost. Consider an example that highlights the difference between hiring more people simply because it seems like more people are needed versus quantitatively determining work content and using that to drive headcount. We need more people. At a trailer manufacturer, a relatively new supervisor was having trouble meeting the production schedule. He asked his manager if he could hire another person. His manager's response was simply, "Okay." The supervisor was stunned. "Just like that? I don't have to justify it or anything?" "No," said the manager. "We already have done that. In fact, you can hire as many employees as you want. Are you sure one is enough?" The supervisor was confused. "I think so," he said. "Why do you say I can hire as many employees as I want?" "Well," the manager answered, "they have a certain value allocated to your work center, and it's based on the work content, what you guys have to do. We converted that into the number of people in your area, and that's our budget for your area. That's all the money there is, and that's how we came up with the number of employees you have. If you feel you need more employees, though, that's up to you. We'll just divide the new number of employees into what's available for your work center. You can have more employees, but the hourly rate for each one will have to go down to keep the total amount of money we pay you guys the same. It works the other way, too. If you can do the work with fewer people, your hourly rates will go up. That's the way it works here. We've studied your area, and we know how much work is there. That's how we define the budget for your area." Later that day, the supervisor visited the manager again. "Hey, we don't need another guy," the supervisor said. "We talked about it, and we don't need as many people as we have now. We want to reduce our headcount by one person." Assessing requests to add staff. Suppose your organization is considering adding more people. Here are a few questions that will quickly reveal if the organization is headcount sensitive and if it bases staffing levels on quantitative analysis. How many people do we have now? This should be an easy question. Amazingly, in many cases, supervisors and managers don't know the answer. Obviously, any organization that doesn't know its current headcount is not headcount sensitive. In any organization that doesn't know its current headcount, the analysis supporting the need for more people has to be soft. Why do we need more people? This obvious question is a great one. If the answer is simply because there's more work, with no quantified analysis to convert the added work content into new headcount, the need for additional people may or may not be real. More analysis is required to determine the appropriate number. Is the increased workload a permanent situation, or is it transitory? If the increase is permanent, adding staff may make sense assuming the analysis behind supporting the request is quantitative and makes sense. If the increased workload is temporary, it might make more sense to address it through overtime, by subcontracting the work, or perhaps by other approaches explained in the answer to the next question. What other options have we considered? If the answer is none, the request for more people has not been adequately thought out. There are many options to hiring more people. These include using overtime, transferring people from other departments, revising the process to improve efficiency and utilization of existing resources, deciding not to do the additional work, a decision admittedly not within a supervisor's purview, but one that needs to be considered at a higher level nonetheless, or subcontracting the work. How busy are our people now? The obvious and most frequently heard answer to that question is very busy. But if the reasoning behind the answer is not supported by quantitative data related to efficiency, capacity, workload, or other factors to be discussed in subsequent chapters, the answer is probably not supportable. These are the bits of information needed to truly support an increased headcount request. If they're missing in the answer to this question, the logic supporting the need for more people is weak. How much overtime are we working now? If the supervisor doesn't know the answer to this question, that is not good. If the answer is no overtime, that should be an obvious indicator that perhaps the need for more people could be met with overtime. If the group is working significant overtime already, it may support a request for increased headcount, but it also indicates a need to explore the factors driving that overtime, which by itself is a significant cost driver. Determining appropriate headcount. How do we go about defining headcount in an objective, quantitative manner? Figure 2.1 at the beginning of this chapter shows a suggested approach. The first step is to define the required tasks. This involves listing each step in the process. The organization will usually have this information available in its work instructions. If it doesn't, the people who do the work can describe what they do, or someone from the cost reduction team or the work center can observe it and list the steps. Suppose, for example, a work center assembles mechanisms consisting of 6 parts, the base and 5 parts to be installed in the base. The tasks to assemble the mechanisms include opening the work order, the document defining how to assemble the device and reading it, obtaining all 6 parts, positioning part 1, the base, on the workbench, installing part 2 into the base, installing part 3 into the base, installing part 4 into the base, installing part 5 into the base, lubricating all parts, installing part 6, the cover, into the base, testing the assembly's function, completing the work order by signing and dating it, and moving the completed mechanism to a storage shelf. After listing these steps, the next step is to assess how long each step should take. For new work, the assessment will be an estimate. If the work is already occurring, it might make sense to observe the operation and time it. If this cannot be done, however, estimating the required time is usually good enough. The next step is estimating the operator's efficiency when performing each task. The idea behind efficiency is to express on a percentage basis how quickly the operator will perform the task compared to the estimate developed earlier. We'll describe efficiency in more detail in the next chapter, but for now it's enough to recognize tasks will generally take longer than the task estimates. That's because people need to go to meetings, they need to go to the bathroom, they may work more slowly at times, different people will work at different rates, and so on. As a starting point, estimating efficiency at 80% for an initial cost estimate usually works well. We next need to divide the estimated task time by the estimated efficiencies to obtain an efficiency-adjusted cost estimate. In other words, if an operator is 80% efficient at performing a 1-minute task, the efficiency-adjusted cost estimate is 1 minute divided by 0.8, which is 1.25 minutes. Note that we are expressing costs in terms of time. It's a simple matter to convert these to dollar amounts later based on labor costs, but for now we'll stay with using time as the way to express costs. After computing the cost estimate for each task, we next sum the efficiency-adjusted costs attained earlier. This gives the amount of time required for each assembly. After obtaining the cost per assembly, we next need to divide the time required for each unit into the number of hours available during the workday. This is typically 8 hours. This calculation will give us the number of units an operator should be able to complete in a workday. This approach provides a quantified estimate of what an operator can produce in a day, but we are interested in calculating how many operators are required. To get this, we need the work center's required daily output. The required daily output is usually dictated by the production schedule, which is in turn driven by the commitments the company makes to its customers. When we know how many units are required in a day, we divide this requirement by the operator's projected daily output. The resulting quotient is the required headcount for this product in that work center. Table 2.1 shows how this is done. The approach shows the required headcount for one product in one work center. Determining the required headcount for the entire operation requires repeating the analysis for each product that goes through each work center, and then summing the total for all work centers. It's a great approach for eliminating subjectivity in determining how many people are required. Footnote 1, page 22. Most people are hesitant to estimate the total amount of time it takes to complete a job. However, when jobs are broken down into their component steps as outlined here, most people feel comfortable estimating the time required to complete each step. Our experience indicates most people tend to underestimate the time required for each step. Surprisingly, this even includes the operators doing the work, so caution is necessary. At this point, after considering the explanation, you might be thinking that quantitatively determining headcount in this manner is a lot of work. It is. Consider the alternative, though. If you don't do it this way, your understanding of how many people the organization needs is at best a subjective guess. If you guess wrong, you either will have too few people and not get the work done in a timely manner, or you will have too many people and your costs will be too high. The cost of either of those situations can easily exceed the cost of doing the analysis described here, not to mention the effect on the shipping schedule, the organization's profit, the ability to win new work, and customer perceptions. Overhead headcount determination. You may be wondering about headcount determination in overhead areas such as quality assurance, purchasing, finance, sales, and so on. These departments usually do not have product-specific work instructions of the type described earlier that define in detail the steps involved in each job. This does not preclude using this approach to calculate appropriate staffing levels. The work content in the overhead functions can be defined as discrete tasks. Time estimates can be developed for each of these tasks. The number of times that tasks have to be accomplished can be estimated, and these can be used to calculate headcount. Managing headcount. After the described analysis has been done for all work centers in the overhead areas, it is a good idea to prepare an XY plot showing required versus actual headcount. This can be done for the entire facility for managing the plant at a macro level, and it can also be done at the work center level to allow supervisors to track their authorized headcounts. Figure 2.2 shows a headcount projection for the entire facility. These kinds of charts are useful for keeping headcount from creeping up. They are also useful for showing if the organization is behind in adding staff when additional staff are needed. Not having enough people can drive up overtime and adversely affect the delivery schedule, as will be explained in a later chapter. The beauty of this approach in either situation, i.e. direct labor for manufacturing or overhead headcount, is that it forces the organization to think about the work content and express it in quantitative terms. People can debate how long a particular task might take and differences in individual performance, but they can't debate the identification of specific tasks and what the required outputs need to be. When debates about task names and efficiencies emerge, it is a good thing. It means the organization is thinking about how many people they need based on quantitative analysis. The example described here in Table 2.1 are rich in information, and this information suggests many opportunities. Consider the following points. The approach quantifies how many people are needed for a particular job in a particular work center. The projected headcount is driven by work content, required production rates, and projected efficiencies. It is not driven by gut feeling or a default response of, we need more people. It is quantitative. People can debate the finer points, but not the inherent logic. The approach can be used for developing headcount requirements for new work in a new work center, or it can be used to assess objectively the need for adding additional staff in existing work centers. It can also be used to assess if the headcount in a stable production environment is appropriate. The approach can be used to assess if overtime is necessary or if existing overtime levels are reasonable. The approach can be used as a basis for developing labor costs in proposals for new business. When this occurs, the labor estimates for both direct and indirect costs will be much more accurate. As the proposal cost estimates are developed, they will reveal the task times that drive cost. With this visibility, the organization can focus on reducing the costs of these tasks and become more competitive. The detail included in Table 2.1 suggests several cost reduction opportunities. For example, can the organization accumulate completed jobs so that it only makes one move to the storage area, thereby reducing the time required? Can the organization pick up parts for more than one device at a time, similarly reducing the time required? Why does it take longer to install part 5 than the other parts? Can the organization modify the process or design to reduce this time? The analysis in the earlier example indicates the organization needs 7.61 people in the assembly work center. Should it have 8 people or 7 people? Can the work center staff at 7 people and meet its required output through judicious use of overtime, or by sharing people with other work centers, or through process modifications, or with efficiency improvements? Sorry, the cats are always competing for my attention when I read. Okay, who should do this work? If the organization is large enough to have a manufacturing or industrial engineering group, these engineers are unquestionably the people who should prepare work instructions and time standards. If the organization does not have manufacturing or industrial engineers, the work center supervisors can prepare the time standards. The work center supervisors should be tasked with using this information for assessing appropriate headcount levels, and for other reasons that will be developed in this next several chapters. Risks. When questioning headcount in existing organizations, people get nervous. Fear, rumors, and resistance are natural reactions. These are tough things to avoid, and there's no easy answer. The best ways we found to control these reactions are transparency. Be open about the effort and speed. Assessing work content means you have to understand and quantify the work, and you can't do that without people knowing what you are doing. We found it's best to be open about it, and to let people know that in some cases you may find that more people are required, and in other cases fewer will be required. Fear will exist, so it is best to not allow the assessment process to drag. When you start examining what people do, their work content, they sometimes get even more nervous. In the direct labor area, this is easier to do because work instructions usually exist, and the product's design eliminates subjectivity about what it takes to make the product. In the overhead areas, it is more of a challenge. Many people are reluctant to describe what they do because of job security concerns. Many people in overhead functions cannot articulate their work content because they've never had to explain it. They know what to do, but they can't describe it. A few may be reluctant because they know they don't have much to do. Gentle questioning and a non-threatening demeanor are always good approaches. Having the area supervisor explain the required tasks for each job is also a good approach. Sometimes this supports what you learn from the people doing the work. Sometimes it is better than having the person who does the work attempt to explain it if that person can't articulate what he or she does. Another risk is getting it wrong. This can go either way. You might underestimate the work content, reduce staff, and not have enough people to do the work. Alternatively, you can overestimate the work content, hire too many people, and incur unnecessary cost. The best approach for mitigating this risk is to be as diligent as possible in identifying all tasks. Assess the time required for each task as accurately as possible, and use reasonable efficiency estimates. It sounds daunting, but the estimates generally tend to be accurate. The headcount determinations tend to be much closer to actual needs when using the quantitative methods described here than they are if managers and supervisors are guessing at what they need. We'll leave off here for today. Stay tuned for part 2.